Individual Thoughts by Trusted Knower.
Episode 002. Does law plus public policy equal liberty?
Cover story.
All right, so it looks like we're going to do another one of these cover stories, huh, Kevin?
I guess so, Bernard. I guess, we're just turning the bureaucratic crank of productivity here. Another episode, another week, another day, blah, blah, blah. You know how it is.
So I'm going to kind of make it more undercover. I'm going to float around in space in the dark here, Kevin.
Well, that sounds very intense, Bernard.
It's kind of a dark sort of world right now that we're living in.
Don't ever question me again, ever.
What?
I give you an order, you take it. You don't ask why.
What are you telling me? Schmidt was bait?
Yes?
Nathan, they executed him on a shitty cellar floor.
And it could have been you.
Don't tell me that. Don't fucking tell me that. You didn't look in his eyes. Don't tell me that.
He was your asset, somebody you use for information.
Oh, Jesus Christ. You don't just trade these people like the baseball cards. It's not a fucking game.
Oh, yes, it is. It's exactly what it is. And it's no kid's game either. This is a whole other game. And it's serious and it's dangerous. And it's not one you want to lose.
Nathan, we killed this man. We used him and we killed him. Okay, then you gotta help me understand this one. Nathan, what are we doing here? And don't give me some bullshit about the greater good.
That's exactly what it's about. Because what we do is unfortunately very, very necessary. And if you're not willing to sacrifice scum like Schmidt for those that want nothing more than their freedom, then you better take a long, hard look at your chosen profession, my friend, because it doesn't get any easier.
We've just seen this incredible, sort of frightening scene with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. And some people might not have seen this, so I'm going to give a little bit of background on it so that people can know what the hell is going on in this, and I think it's worth understanding. Robert Redford and Brad Pitt are on the roof in Berlin. They are two CIA operatives, and Robert Redford is the senior operative, and Brad Pitt is a junior operative. And Robert Redford's character is telling Brad Pitt's character that basically someone that they had been dealing with, this East German man, Schmidt, had been used as bait to catch a mole that was inside of the American operation in Berlin. And the direct consequence that was known beforehand is that Schmidt would be killed in order to like lure the Soviets into believing that this was true. So that's the setup of what happened, like right before this meeting on the roof. But the reason why this is relevant to what we're talking about and to the episode that we're in, which is does law plus public policy equal liberty, is I believe that this is a really good example of showing the two sides of the argument. I think Robert Redford is arguing sort of a public policy argument that we have to make these rules in order to promote the greater good. And, he says to Brad Pitt, today, these rules saved your life. But Brad Pitt's character is saying, but it's not right. It's not right to use a human being as a tool to accomplish, even if you think what you're doing is good, it's still not right to use them. He says you can't treat people like baseball cards. And I think that's a fundamental tension in public policy versus the law. In this episode, we're going to talk a lot about Caleb Taylor's interview that we did and this tension that exists between trying to create public policy rules and what the government does sort of on a day-to-day basis and having a set of foundational principles that govern what you should do. And I think you can see that both sides in this scene, I mean, you understand that like the CIA is fighting these terrible people, right, that are out there that are doing malevolent, horrible things. You read the history of communism, the history of Nazism. It's truly awful to know what they did. And the murdering of innocent people, the murdering of children, and the murdering of babies, the shooting of babies, the Nazis with, I don't want to say it, it's too horrible. but it's like they literally there's murdering children. You know, Anne Frank was basically murdered by the fucking Nazis, and the Nazis are evil, and the communists really are just as evil, and it's a collectivism, and it's this collectivist mentality. I mean, it's almost like the collectivist mentality is a pure public policy mentality. Like, it doesn't matter what we do because we're doing it for the greater good. We're going to do whatever we have to do, even if it's wrong, because that is what we're going to do, because that's our public policy. And so to fight people like that, you end up with Robert Redford's character, who is saying, you know, if we don't do this, then, you know, people who want nothing more than their freedom are going to lose their lives. So we have to be really bad in some ways. Like, we have to sacrifice this guy who really is not really a good guy, but, you know, he's still a human being. But we're going to use him as a tool to catch somebody who's trying to screw us. And it's not nice, it's not right, but we have to do it. We just have to do it. And again, Brad Pitt's character is saying, but it's just still not right. And I think that is something I think that regardless of whether you think what they did was right or not, well, on the whole, you still have to ask yourself, like, how do we deal with this aspect of what we're doing? I think that's what we have to ask ourselves. And I think in this age, you know, the war on terror, possibly war with China, obviously there's a great concern of security in the United States, and, you know, what are we going to do to our fellow Americans in order to accomplish security? It's these questions are not simple, and they deserve moral introspection. Even if as a group of people we choose to do a certain thing, we should still ask ourselves whether it's right or not. Yeah. And even if we decide to do something, we should still suspect maybe that we did the wrong thing, because it's a horrible, hard question, and we can make mistakes very easily.
Well, we started episode 2, which is entitled, "Does Law plus Public Policy Equal Liberty?" Question mark. By this movie clip that was very dramatic. And let's take a look at that clip one more time for everybody.
The president's ETA from the East Asia Economic Summit is about 20 hours from now. He wants a recommendation by then from this group. Now, as I understand it, you want to firebomb the town of Cedar Creek, California, population 2,600, with something called a fuel-air bomb, the most powerful non-nuclear weapon in our arsenal. Vaporizes everything within a mile of ground zero, men, women, children, and one airborne virus. Destruction complete, case closed, crisis over. This Constitution of the United States, I've read it cover to cover. I don't find anything in it about vaporizing 2,600 American citizens. But it does say several times that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. So, I want an army of experts citing hundreds and thousands of lab experiments telling any idiot with a camera that there was no other way. If there is a voice of opposition out there, I want him in here, now. Those are the citizens of Cedar Creek. Go on, look at them. These are not statistics, ladies and gentlemen. They're flesh and blood. And I want you to burn those into your memories, because those images should haunt us till the day we die.
That is a incredibly dramatic way to open the episode. I think that we may have frightened people a little bit with that clip. Oh! No, it's a great scene from, I think on the whole is a pretty interesting movie called Outbreak from the 90s. And the movie stars Dustin Hoffman and Cuba Gooding Jr. And Rene Russo as these virologists who are trying to catch up with this Ebola virus that gets loose. And it's in this small California town. And basically, it's so dangerous and so deadly that the U.S. government is preparing to drop a fuel air bomb, I guess. It's like a nuclear weapon almost on this town to just to get rid of the virus. Now, you know, we live in this time of COVID, and we have a lot of things people are doing trying to contain the COVID. Obviously, this Ebola virus in this scene is a lot more vicious and a lot more of an existential threat to all of humanity. And I just think this is like the best scene in the whole movie, and it kind of shows, in some sense, the danger of the power of the government, but in some sense, this character that's being played by J.T. Walsh, the actor, I think it's one of his greatest scenes. He's been in tons of movies, but wow, what a great scene. He's demanding that the cabinet, take this utterly seriously, and to look at the people as people, not as some abstract, statistical thing, but these are real people, and they're really going to die, and their lives are going to be obliterated by taking this move. And he reiterates that, the Constitution doesn't say anything about this kind of power, but it does say, these people deserve due process, and, damn it, we're going to give them some due process. And I think that is just such a great, moment of what it would be like to actually be in the room when making such a life and death kind of decision. Caleb brings up this point of the loud American, and the idea that too often in American politics today, we have these sort of one-sided decisions that are being made. And so if you're a conservative in power, you just have conservative voices around you. If you're a liberal or a progressive in power, you surround yourself with people who think the same way. And in doing so, you have, you sort of blocked out the reality of other opinions and other points of view. And what J.T. Walsh's character says in this scene is, if there's a voice of opposition out there, I want them in here. Like, they're taking such a big decision that they don't want to be second guessed anywhere, basically. They don't want any credible counterpoint to exist, and to be able to say that, we took in all the information to make this really, really hard decision. And I just think that is a good example. That's an example of government doing things correctly, actually.
Yeah, because otherwise you'll have a system that gets so bloated and corrupted that it'll just run off the rails.
Well, that's pretty funny, man.
I love that clip.
Boom! It's like playing with two die-cast cars. Crash.
Except it's public policy.
It's public policy. I love it because it really is sort of like public policy. You got a big disaster already, right? The one train is already crashed and wrecked. How are we going to fix this big wreck? Well, the only choice is to take another train and plow it right into the other one, and just to drive the wreck a little further down the road,
But it makes for great cinema, great drama.
It is the great drama through which we live.
I think the metaphor, of course, with the train going off the rails, smashing into another train and all that, is very relative to what we talked about with Caleb. Just the fact that there's legislation being created that really isn't thought through on any rational level whatsoever.
A lot of times when a governor or state or even the federal government would take action, it would confirm the worst possible beliefs of the people that were worried about it. You'd hear somebody would say something along the lines of, I'm not really sure I trust the government. I think that they're going to make movement A, and that's going to cause me my job. And then all of those things happened exactly that way, and absolutely confirmed the worst fears of a lot of people out there. And it's this idea of, okay, how can we avoid that? I mean, from a governmental standpoint, from a public policy standpoint, you still have to address the worries of the people over whom you have public policy, right? And half of the people are really worried about the disease, and half of the people are really worried about the government's reaction to it. You don't ignore one half.
Right.
You address both.
Well, again, the idea of every time you're creating policy, you're just you're making adjustments to fit the current situation. You're trying to somehow, change the big mess in a way that's not as annoying to you in certain respects, but you're just sort of scrambling things more. It's like you keep turning the Rubik's Cube around and are you unraveling it, or are you raveling? Are you further confusing the colors and the sides and making it harder to solve? And
I think the word you're looking for, are you further randomizing it?
Is that in fact the term I'm looking for? I don't know.
I think so, but I'm not sure.
I think this is the right way for us to do this episode.
I don't think it's as impressive if your face isn't coming out of space, Kevin.
You got me there.
You have Captain Kirk behind you, so
I do. Captain Kirk is backing me up here.
So, Kevin, what do you think about twin Gatling guns on a horse?
That's some horse.
Well, with the whole Western Wild West comment, I was thinking, well, what's the craziest scene I could think of in any Western type movie? And that was it, Jonah Hex.
Do you think the horse came with the Gatling guns?
Oh, I think it was a special custom job that Jonah must have worked out.
I think you had to train the horse to behave pretty well when the Gatling guns are firing.
Well, some of that could have been special effects and CGI and all that stuff.
I believe everything I see in the movies.
Everything?
I believe that Captain Kirk can be transported and that William Shatner isn't telling us how it really works.
Well, that's a possibility that William Shatner is,
He's in on it. He's on the inside of that.
Really Elvis. Anyway.
He's really Elvis.
Other than that. No, but, yeah, I think he makes some really good points. And most importantly, and as you know me, being a natural rights advocate, there's just rights that are just rooted in nature that we all have, and that's these basic principles, and those are the principles on which this country was found. And so now to make laws that legislate in such a way to where they ignore all that and they just say, oh no, everything is illegal, you have no natural rights whatsoever, it's just what we tell you, well then that's not freedom at all. That's dictate from the state for what they permit you to do. So I think the things he's touching on there are just so paramount for people to understand what's happening and how things have really turned upside down.
Sometimes the rhetoric that's used is not healthy. I mean, is really rather unhealthy. Rhetoric, for instance, in healthcare law specifically, it is written from a point of view, and this isn't like a stated point of view, this is a tacit point of view that exists in the entirety of the healthcare code in the state of Virginia and most states, frankly, that everything is illegal until we say it's legal. And that is an extremely unhealthy direction to a rhetorical statement to make inside the code for anything, much less healthcare. So when anybody wants to come up with some kind of new innovation, whether it's an insurance model, a new insurance model, whether it's something like direct primary care, telemedicine, any number of things that I can't even probably think of because I'm just not that bright, the answer is unequivocally no, until somebody gets involved with the legislature and the legislature decides, okay, we'll allow it.
So it's disallowed until proven allowed.
Yes, that's pretty much. That's pretty much
what
it is.
The presumption of the status quo, basically.
Yes, it is the status quo.
One thing he said that was really interesting was that not only do people have this sort of mentality about, this is the way, we can't just let things be a free-for-all, but the language of the legislative code itself has a bias in it, and that it's written in a way, it's organized in a way that its sort of presupposition is that anything that's not authorized is that's not explicitly told that you can do it is basically illegal. And I just think that's sort of an interesting, not only that people have that in their minds, but that it's also that it's sort of baked into the way in the language of the code. And to make something fit, I think he says elsewhere in the interview that whenever he writes legislative code, he writes it in the dialect, so to speak, of the code the way it is written as it is. And so it's almost like if you're sort of in a culture or in a society in which everyone speaks a certain way, it's kind of difficult to express things that are contrary to that whole kind of outlook. And I think that's sort of the problem with the mentality. And again, in libertarian circles, we call it a statist mentality, the idea that the state, the government has some sort of special wisdom that doesn't exist in general. And again, I think sometimes government officials can be wiser than the average person, and I think sometimes the legislature can be smart in making certain things illegal. But again, I think the idea that they simply have that wisdom by the fact of their office is not the case, and I think that's where we should be predisposed to liberty, not to control generally.
Well, yeah, the statist point of view and mindset would be that collectivist philosophy and ideology, to where, well, we're just going to dictate the way it is, and just the audacity to say that you have no rights whatsoever, that everything's illegal unless we say it is legal, is really the opposite of any kind of free construct of any kind of nation that would be a nation of free people. The construct for a government cannot exist like that. That's just insanity. And so to me, that's crazier, way crazier than a horse with 2 Gatling guns mounted on it. I mean, in all seriousness. So
you're saying, in the scale of things that are crazy, a horse with 2 Gatling guns, it's not as crazy as the government is. The government that is the way it is today.
The status quo of today, yes,
The
exactly.
status quo today is more crazy.
Yes,
than a horse with 2 Gatling guns,
by far.
Now, what do you think the horse's opinion on that question would be?
It would be something like, "No, sir, I didn't like it."
No, sir, I didn't like it.
Let's go to that panel discussion we did about the Caleb Taylor interview. Today, we have our 2 good friends, Jim Turbot here on my right, and our friend Barry Williams is on with us also. Hey, Barry.
I just wanted to comment that what this guy is doing is extremely good work, and I'm just really glad to see somebody's doing this. Both, writing legislation and articulating it to people, what it really implies, that everything is illegal. Because if you're clear, you can knock down a lot of houses of cards out there, and there's a lot of them.
So hey, we're listening to Caleb, and he's talking about the Virginia Institute's free enterprise position, and apparently some people think that conservatives are, free enterprise, and that's where we throw in this clip of Dana Carvey shouting "wrong." It's kind of an old reference, but Dana Carvey is mocking John McLaughlin from the McLaughlin Group. But I think it's worth remembering what the McLaughlin Group was. It was a Sunday morning show, but a lot of people paid attention to what was on that show.
Well, the format of the show was he had 4 people, usually the same ones every week. Fred Barnes, Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Cliff, and Morton Kondracki. They would, have 3 segments with each have a topic, and they would talk over each other, and he's pretty high on himself, I must say. Wrong! They were talking about how in Virginia everything's illegal unless they legalize it, and I wonder if there's something in the Constitution or a statute that says that the only authorities that local governments have are those that are granted by the state.
Defaulting everything to be illegal is obviously against the founding principles of the nation. I mean, the whole concept is that the laws, the Constitution, Bill of Rights is supposed to restrict the government, not the people. So obviously, to me, this goes hand in hand with the way things have been changing for a long period of time, by which somebody can be presumed guilty until proven innocent, for example. Taking something that was a principle at one point in time in the nation and flipping it upside down.
Well, I was thinking of Madison. It's like the powers of the government are few and limited. The rights of the people are infinite, basically. Just because we enumerated some doesn't mean that's the full list.
The interesting thing that also I want to point out is that a lot of people will talk about states' rights, but if you actually go through the Constitution and Bill of Rights, there's no such mention of states having rights whatsoever. And I believe philosophically, because collectives can't have rights, only individuals can have rights.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate phrase. And it's associated with segregation, too, so it has a double whammy.
I think we need to find people willing to run for office and willing to say these things and willing to have some coaching about it. I mean, in North Carolina, anyone running for U.S. Congress gets free public television time. And I've run for Congress 2 times in North Carolina. And so I got to speak to the whole state. But if I was speaking nonsense, that wouldn't be worth very much. It would be nice if people could get together and say, oh, what are you going to say to the whole state? And how about this? Everything is illegal until it's like, oh, really? I didn't know that. My hobby is writing satirical political fiction, and I try to find things to say that are shocking, but without really rubbing people's nose in it. It's about the present from the point of view of 10,000 years in the future, where they got our history a little not quite clear. And there's a national religion administration, which gives, and a character, Reverend Bud Miller, who starts out as a moonshiner, and he loses his license to preach, because he builds a swimming pool in his farm and he tries to have it registered as a baptismal pool. And he wants to build a fence around it so the National Religion Administration doesn't see anybody having fun in it. But I mean, who sees that?
That's great.
But politicians can, use words that will grab people's attention. I mean, I hope people will say, "What? Is there really a National Religion Administration?
Yeah.
Do they have licenses to preach? I didn't know that." Of course, it's a lie. Fiction writers, that's what we do. We tell lies. But I mean, lies have a lot of power.
Apparently.
All right, so when the subroutine compounds the interest, right, it uses all these extra decimal places that just get rounded off. So we simplified the whole thing, and we round them all down and just drop the remainder into an account that we opened.
So you're stealing?
No, you don't understand. It's very complicated. It's aggregate, so I'm talking about fractions of a penny here, and over time, they add up to a lot.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's not yours?
Well, it becomes ours.
How is that not stealing?
Lately, I've been thinking about third parties, since I'm officially registered in a so-called third party. I get thinking, well, what kind of fourth party do we need? Maybe just sort of shake things up. How about the fuck you party? That could communicate. I mean, Donald Trump has given everybody permission to be impolite. Some politicians are going to figure that out, Hey, I can get away with this.
Dice man for president.
If there is a voice of opposition out there, I want him in here now. Those are the citizens of Cedar Creek.
Yeah, I find it interesting, this idea of the loud American, especially because of the partisan gridlock that happens, that we've been, in my lifetime, I've been seeing it get worse and worse and worse. It just, there's no end to it. It seems, it just keeps getting worse, to where people on one side of this so-called equation won't consider the thoughts, the ideas, the concerns of some other side, and not even side, just positions in general. This idea that, well, it's only, you have to be this way, we can't consider any other positions. I mean, let's stop putting things in this left-right continuum. I don't even agree with, first of all. But I think if people would stop putting things in this ridiculous political paradigm and start looking at, well, what are some options of how to deal with a problem? Obviously, the largest part of this hurdle is to overcome the partisan duopoly mindset and get out of that, basically.
I think Greg Gutfeld calls this the prison of two ideas, where it's like either this set of things or that set of things with no evaluation independently, that some of this and some of that might both be true. It also reminds me, a friend of mine recently said that when someone's up to be considered a saint by the Catholic Church, they go through a process where they get somebody to be the devil's advocate. So he was saying that when, I think it was for Mother Teresa, they got Christopher Hitchens to be that person, and he did, according to my friend, a little too good of a job, and so they stopped doing it.
Why is that Virginia guy not running for office? He's such a communicator.
He's great. Caleb is fantastic. I think there's really a trade-off to being a nonprofit public policy person. Like, we know that, like, Charles Koch recently made a big apology for supporting these lobbying efforts by Americans for Prosperity and whatnot. And I think it's probably true that a lot of the Koch network would have been less scrutinized if they had stuck to their 501c3 activities. And Caleb, is a real good guy, and I'm sure he doesn't want to be attacked viciously.
A libertarian in my congressional district ran like 20 years ago, and I was trying to help him, and he said, "Can you basically find dirt on the incumbent?" And so I went to the library and looked for stuff. So it seems like it's just in the nature of politics to do this process of like, oh, you're running for office, see why you shouldn't get elected.
It's a bag of dirty tricks, basically. I think for Caleb, I think that there's a direct, if in some way, I don't know it is, how he gets paid, if he gets paid at all for his work. But I would think that if you're going to run for office, Jacob Hormer ran for president on the Libertarian Party ticket last time. And I think he had to take a leave of absence from his, again, 501c3.
Right, yeah.
But I don't know. I just think the broader thing is that if you start running for office, then you become the target of an enormous amount of hate. Barry, you ran for Congress on a libertarian ticket, right?
Yeah, I did it. The first time I did it was in '92 in the Durham area.
What was your experience?
Well, at that time, I heard or read that when libertarians run for office, they get 1% of the vote, no matter whether they campaign or do nothing but just appear on the ballot. And I've run twice for Congress and twice for North Carolina legislature, and I always got more than 2% of the votes. But my purpose was not to win. The purpose was to help put libertarianism on the map, which it is now. You can't listen to radio, NPR one day without hearing the word. But, knowing that, I know, well, there's no point for me putting effort into this. I need to do what I do, which is I'm a pretty good talker. And then I ran in the Western North Carolina for Congress in 2000. That's why Kevin Rollins called me up in the first place. And I got interviewed for the Mountain Express about it. And then there was a party of people in my neighborhood, and they're all reading the Mountain Express, and they're reading this article, and they say, the question, how much have you spent on your campaign? And my answer was, I have spent nothing on my campaign. And the next question was, how much do you plan to spend on your campaign? And my answer was, I plan to spend nothing on my campaign. Which turned out to be not actually accurate, because to get on TV, I had to travel to Raleigh, which required a tank of gas, a 12-inch long Subway sandwich, and a 2-liter Mountain Dew, which I think I probably spent about $32 on my campaign because of that trip.
I love that.
Did some corporation donate that to you and to win you over?
Who?
Some corporation fund your $32 and...
No. I pull that out of my own, low income homeschooling pocket.
I think Caleb's comment about the loud American reiterates what the JT Walsh character was saying in the Outbreak clip, that we need to hear the opposition. Like, we can't just say we're going to win and we're strong and we're big and, we're going to run right over you with a steamroller. That's what communist China does. When they run the guy over in Tiananmen Square with the tank, that's them saying, we don't care what you have to say. We don't care what you have to say, and therefore we're just going to obliterate you. We're in America, and it is incumbent upon us to hear the Minority Report, to hear the thing that tells us that maybe we're not 100% right. And maybe we even hear it and we don't necessarily heed it, but we still hear it. Like, we heard people say that it wasn't right in some way. And if we can't do that, we will lose our Republican system of government, basically, because it's not about pure democracy. It's not about if you get a big enough mob, you can just push it over on everybody the way you think that, it should be done. And I do feel like, and again, even though, I'm a critic of Trump and, I got lots of problems with Republicans too, but I feel like there's this impulse to say that if you don't agree with the narrative, you have nothing. And I think that's bullshit.
Censored and canceled.
Pretty much.
We were discussing a theoretical, but not completely impossible future national religion agency or something like that. And it reminded me that I kind of feel like with a different First Amendment right, the press, it kind of already exists. You have press credentials that allow some people to go in and ask questions, but not others. And the idea that somebody who's in the professional press can get a piece of information that relates to a crime and can say, source confidentiality, I have the privilege of not testifying, whereas we four don't have that privilege. And I think that that's an example of, authorizing certain people to be press and giving them special privileges.
The National Religion Administration, NRA. But, like I say, it's from the point of view of 10,000 years in the future where history has gotten a little fuzzy.
It's getting fuzzy already. I mean, the way I see it is people are making a religion out of whatever the state says, regardless what it is, whether it's about how COVID is spread or which method we're going to use or it's like, no, it has to be this one thing and it's only going to be this way and this is the truth. And anyone that disagrees, any scientists that disagree with what we're saying are censored. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. It's a religion.
Because they're dangerous.
Yeah, it's dangerous to consider other viewpoints. I've always heard this idea of getting second opinions, from medical opinions and stuff, but now that's not the case at all, it seems. There's only one opinion, and that's the state's opinion. So where's the line between state and religion anyway? When they make science a religion, or really they're throwing out science and they're making the state the religion. Whatever the state says, regardless of the state says, I'm going to go with this scientists or these scientists, and I'm going to ignore these other scientists, which has been going on for a long time, actually. Look into the food pyramid.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Well, I think just to keep up with the times, we should pre-censor some person who's not invited to our show. Like we should have a blank box, just like this person cannot be seen because Kevin Rollins is an asshole. Well, it's like, imagine you lived in China and you have a selection of things that you're allowed to talk about. And, you should definitely be enthusiastic of at least one of those ideas.
Well, we don't have to imagine it really anymore. That's kind of the way it seems to be at this point, with the censorship issues and just not actually considering other points of view. So again, I see all this as a religion, and it seems like this the religion of the state. It's whatever the state religion, and you have two religious groups that are in control of it. And one's called the Republican Party, and one's called the Democratic Party.
This is really great because it ties back into the theme of the Caleb interview, which is that J.T. Walsh's character screaming at the people in the cabin or whatever, but like saying we need to have the alternative within our decision, and this whole kind of idea that you're going to just completely eliminate alternative points of view and say no, we have the point of view. It's completely going against this idea that getting the counterpoint in and incorporating the counterpoint into what you believe is part of maintaining the ability to judge what you're doing.
I think we need more people saying shocking things in public, like PJ or O'Rourke, described, I guess, statism as in terms of the shoot grandma rule. You guys all know about that?
No, let's hear about that. Yeah, let's hear about that.
Everything that is a law is supposed to be enforced, and enforcement means if you disobey the law, the police will come and arrest you, or they'll try, and you say, no, I won't go. and they say then, come with us or we'll shoot you. So that applies to everybody, including your grandma. So, if your grandma says, well, I won't go along with that law. If you go along with the law, you are in effect saying you agree with your grandmother being shot over it, which is true. But the politicians sort of, try not to talk about that.
That makes it harder to deal with, though. It's like,
but the thing is, you get somebody, in the public eye, like PJ O'Rourke, who says these things and puts a lot of thought into coming up with a way that focuses people on what it really means on the gut level. Actually, I don't really want my grandmother to be shot.
In most cases, yeah.
But I just never had to think about it before.
Yep. I think that's so well said. And thank you, PJ O'Rourke, also.
I wish he would run for president.
Well, let's not get into politics.
Go ahead.
My mother-in-law, like myself, I think really hated conflict. And I learned a really neat trick from her to avoid conflict. She would say, when somebody says something stupid, evil, or crazy, I remember my mother-in-law and I say, And nobody ever said, "You got it. That's all you got to say." No, I get away with it.
That's great.
Say like, how could you possibly think that?
Then no, that's the opposite end. That's the other thing to do.
What did you mean by that?
Kevin, you're not smiling, Kevin. Let's make you smile. Should we tickle you?
He doesn't hate conflict. That's
I'm trying to make it better.
That's a hypothesis. I don't know whether you hate conflict or not.
Are you putting on a
No, I think conflict is necessary as part of human society. I don't like conflict particularly. I don't enjoy it, but a certain degree of rivalry is good and healthy. I'm not saying I want everyone having fisticuffs constantly, but the talk about unity right now wears me out. It wears me out, basically.
You're talking about Biden's talk about unity?
Bring us together.
Analytically, it's like it's not real. It's not a real idea because it's like, what does unity even mean? I think that the ideal for a free society is to have tolerance and to be able to, have plenty of disagreement all over the place.
No, I think that everybody should be for the Libertarian Party.
Oh, God help us. That would be a terrible thing.
Does that sound about right?
Well, not completely, I mean, it's always there. It's watching. It's been watching me for years. The same fucking thing is going on now. But I know what to do. I know exactly what to do. Believe me, I've got a fucking solution right here.
What we're listening to about the big, companies giving us exactly what we want, but then also in turn getting all this support from government in various ways and being able to muscle their way in a way. If it was the mob, wouldn't it be the same kind of thing that the mob does with buying off politicians? What's the difference?
This takes me back to the 60s when I was reading Ayn Rand, and she made a big deal about the power of pull. Mm-hmm. Isn't this what we're talking about?
Sounds like it.
Pretty much. Yeah. One of the concepts that we deal with at George Mason, we talk about regulatory capture. And the idea is that you say, we got to make some rules to control these out of control industries. But of course, it always comes down to the fact that the industries that are going to be regulated, they write the regulations that favor them, basically.
Exactly.
And it's like Brer Rabbit, throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah.
Regulate me, please regulate me. And Amazon, yes, Amazon has enormous clout. And when they went shopping for a state, and again, I'm proud that they chose Virginia. I'm a proud Virginian. But yet I really do stand by my statement before that, I think that it would be so much better off if we just made Virginia a much more competitive. Virginia, by the way, is not the most competitive in terms of business environments. One of the problems Virginia has is that we have the military industrial complexes here. And Virginia's gotten used to just the fat checks from DOD, basically, to run all kinds of projects here. Now, again, I'm not anti-military. I'm very pro-military. Dominion Energy, that's another big one. And why do they have so much clout?
Ayn Rand would say this is the power of pull. I like to call it corruption.
So the idea that it's feasible in any way for gun control to actually work without simply just being utterly ignored. Similar to, I mean, so, you know, we've got all these rules on marijuana usage, and nobody pays attention to that. And even the police are just like, what am I going to do? Arrest everybody? You know? And so it's gotten to this point where I see in the conversations that I have with conservatives and even some gun-wielding liberals, where the response is, I'm just going to ignore it. When you have so many rules that it's impossible to know when you're breaking them at any point. The subconscious, if you don't even need to do this consciously, the subconscious is pretty easy for it to realize that if I don't know I'm breaking the law, it's pretty certain that the enforcers probably don't know I'm breaking the law either. And if there's no perception of enforcement, then the law doesn't exist. This is where I see this like kind of Second Amendment thing going.
Caleb approaches this matter, from one side. I think that one thing he's not thinking about is that there are people that are in jail or have gone to prison for marijuana. There are people that are serving life terms for some drugs and whatnot.
Yeah, so someone's paying attention.
And not only that, gun confiscation doesn't have to be upfront and forward. In fact, the way the Nazis did it was by first registration and this sort of thing, and then they just kept on and on to the next step. Well, one way around even that sort of thing is this, like red flag laws, for example, which allows someone to be accused of hearsay. Basically, it allows police to get a phone call, an anonymous phone call, saying somebody's a danger to themselves or others, and then just go at 5 o'clock in the morning or so and take their guns away. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, people generally don't react well anyway, let alone if they're being startled and told they're taking their guns away. And the one example I want to cite is the first one, I believe, that occurred, and it isn't the last. Apparently, I think at least one or another one has happened since. But there's a gentleman who's deceased now. He was shot and killed. His name is Gary J. Willis, 61 years old, and that was in Maryland. And that was under this red flag gun law. Basically, here's a guy who, all the reports seem to be pretty much the same. He goes to the door at 5:20 or so in the morning, and it's police. So he puts down his pistol and then answers the door, realizing it's the police, figuring something's wrong. Who knows? Maybe something's wrong in the neighborhood, something's going on. He answers the door, hey, can I help you? They're like, yeah, we're here to confiscate your gun. And he's like, no, you're not. And he grabs the gun. The officer grabs the gun. There's a fight over the gun. A shot goes off. Whether it was that gun or another one, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. Point is he gets killed. And what did he do? Nothing. And the extra sad thing about it is the police on film saying, well, yeah, imagine what he might have done if we didn't do this. Like, they did a good thing. And this is this is extremely dangerous. And this is why so many people are so adamant about the gun issue, and that 10 years ago, there wasn't a party elected for president saying, we're coming for your guns. And now we have that, and all these decades that have gone by as we've been watching little by little, encroaching upon this natural right of self-defense and life, for that matter, and being called like crazy to worry about such a thing. And I'm still being told, well, it can't happen and all this. It's like, what are you talking about? It's happening now.
Well, I want to speak real fast on one part of what you said about imagining, the imagination of what could happen. And I think it's very critical to understand that imagining the things that can go awry under some legally authorized thing to go do are sort of infinite, like, oh, I have a car. I can imagine. I mean, Jim's got a car. I just imagined him driving into a crowd of people. Well, arrest that man. Arrest that man. Like, that would make no sense. And, guns are, by their design, they are instruments of destruction, but, they are also used for protection. Of course, unfortunately, the mind is filled with examples of horrible abuses of the right to keep and bear arms. Like in our current time, like the Las Vegas shooter, the little shithead who shot up a church in Charleston. Who's going to get the death penalty? Rightly so.
Well, there's the guy who shot up the church in Texas who got shot. It was by people that had guns on them, and with these crazy politicians and collectivists that want to just take away people's guns, they're not either. I don't know if they're just insane or they're just daft or are they evil, because all they're doing is they're taking away common citizens' ability to protect themselves and their neighbors and loved ones. I don't understand how people don't get that.
I was just wondering whether anybody's ever lately interviewed Angela Davis about her opinions on gun control, because I told one of my neighbors, who calls himself an anarchist, but he's a socialist anarchist, and I said, progressives used to be so much more interesting, like in the days when Abbie Hoffman posed for the cover of his book holding a rifle. And like the leftists have completely forgotten about that. If the Symbionese Liberation Army got reborn, maybe public opinion would change. These leftists would start saying, "Oh yeah, guns are good." I don't know.
Dream on.
Oh yeah, my neighbor said, "I don't think Abbie Hoffman ever shot a rifle in his whole life." Yeah, but he did have his picture taken with one. I talk about people forgetting history 10,000 years from now. Hey, listen, people have forgotten history 50 years from now.
10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah.
The degradation of people's historical knowledge, it goes back to that whole thing with J.T. Walsh, getting all the information in the same room. But if you've forgotten the history that you lived under, then you won't have all the same information at the same time, make a decision based on it.
Exactly.
Oh, man, you got it.
Maybe people in 3 generations will be much more likely to follow the law. Americans tend to have, we have this kind of underlying anarchistic, banal anarchistic tendency. Even the people that are the most reasonable drivers I know set their cruise control 8 to 10 miles over the speed limit. It's something that we do as Americans. We break the rules, especially if we know it's the rule. Oh, I'm not allowed to do that? Okay. There's an entire meme culture around this idea of I'm going to do things that I'm not supposed to do. Like people, there'll be signs set up, please don't feed the bears, and the dude's right behind the side feeding a bear a Twinkie or something and taking a picture of it and put it on the internet, right? There's a whole meme culture around this. It is a part of being American. That's what we do. We have since day one. I mean, in the very beginning, George Washington was the law, and that early legislature, they were the law. And what was the first thing that happened? A whiskey rebellion. You don't take my whiskey.
I do think it's true that one of the features of American culture is, as he says, we wouldn't talk about it like that, the banal anarchistic tendency, but there's sort of the fuck the government kind of mentality, or let's go break the rules, don't feed the bears. Yeah, I'm gonna go feed the bears. I do think that's a feature. I'm not saying it's great that we have people just want to break rules. I do think though that being willing to break rules is a good thing, especially when the rules are so stupid.
It's kind of like jury nullification on a real personal, non-trial basis.
That's a great one. I like that.
Yeah.
The problem though is that the judges are instructing the jury that they don't have that power, and that's actually false. That's actually false.
Oh, I agree.
Getting back to that word corruption again.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that what I've understood now is that every facet of government is fully corrupted. When I learned about the whole way the jury is supposed to work, well, that was corrupted a long time ago. Law enforcement's corrupted because we're never supposed to have a police force. We're supposed to have sheriffs and deputies, and then sheriffs that can deputize citizens when we need to, and things like this. There were things that were set up that made sense, and over the course of the 200 years or so, they've been all whittled away. And we're left in a situation where now you can have on video situations where there's actually, here's an election and we see on video corruption, yet, but that doesn't have standing. And, all this, it's like, well, what facet of government actually is just at all anymore? Where is there no corruption?
Well, I think that's too high of a standard, though. To say that there should be no corruption, there's always going to be corruption in human systems.
We should aspire not to have it, even if we can't achieve it.
We aspire to it, but it's like it will be endemic in any human system.
But then when it's ignored, at what point does it become so ridiculous when it's being ignored that there's so much corruption?
It kind of reminds me of how when we talk about the militia and the Second Amendment, for the left, it's like, well, that's what the National Guard is, which is sort of corruption of what the idea of militia was.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I think that it's like recognizing, firstly, though, that there has been enormous changes in American society, and that in some degree the size of society affects it. And the 20th century, of course, played out the great powers with the nuclear struggle, and the conflict with the Soviets was so tremendous and huge that a lot of our systems have been oriented in this much bigger, much more immediate way. And so you ask, like, why do we have police versus like sheriff's deputies? In part, it's because of the responsiveness and now, I don't think you're wrong in saying, what were the original principles upon which the government was founded. I think we should think about that. But the 20th century is not a great model for us to like base our reality on, because it was a wasteland, basically. It was a moral wasteland.
Well, that's a good example, though. It's a good example to see how horrible it is when you allow a government to switch over from a bottom-up standard to a top-down, and that's really what's happening in the country.
Fair enough.
We had the master examples of history with communism and fascism. The numbers of people that were killed in those countries under their control outside of war is like, hundreds of millions.
Then you have the Civil War, for example, that didn't really have to happen. I mean, the southern states could have seceded according to the Declaration of Independence. That was what the Declaration of Independence was a statement of declaration of independence from England. So they were seceding, right? So if they say that this happens once in a while and this would happen now, well, obviously a union that was in control of the Supreme Court saying, well, no, it's not allowable. So then what? The only alternative is war. Well, that didn't have to happen.
Jefferson said that having an insurrection or a civil war every 20, 30 years was a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think it's obviously undesirable to have a war. The history of the United States has been the history of dramatic change. The United States was founded at a time when the social morals were dramatically changing. I mean, of course, Jefferson himself knew very well that slavery was no bueno. He even tried to put it in the Declaration of Independence, but we see him as an example as somebody who did not live up to what he thought should be done because he was still depending on his own fortune on slavery. And I don't think we should ever try to erase that history. At the same time, I think we should also realize that America was emerging into the world. And things were all screwed up because these ideas had not come to their full fruition. And I'm so glad that we get to live in a world in which basically there's no question that those certain things are wrong. Like, thank God for us that we get to live in that world.
When you talk about America emerging, it reminds me of an old 50s science fiction movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think it was, in which these aliens made these pods, and inside the pod, they'd make reproductions of human beings, but there were actually aliens. And somebody opened up one of the pods and saw a half-formed version of himself. He wasn't already all there yet, but he could tell it was on his way. So he was emerging.
But in a very bad way, hopefully the opposite of what America was.
Yeah, right. He was...
From the body snatcher's viewpoint, I'm sure he was emerging.
Yeah, he was becoming an improved body snatcher, yes.
What a waste of a truly good house. So much could be done with it. A family and children could live here. It was designed for that. Such a waste.
So Bernard, that last scene that we're showing with Keanu Reeves walking into the dilapidated house, talking about how it was truly a good home. It was a place designed for children, a place for people to live, to be happy. And it's just a waste. And I think that speaks to the entire theme of what we've been dealing with in this episode and the darkness that we felt and we talked about at the very beginning. And that this sadness that we feel about what's happening today in our country, in the United States. And I wanted to remind everybody that we're not without hope, and that we're not totally unhappy and sad, and we're happy that we get to work together, and that we get to have a few laughs here and there. That horse with 2 Gatling guns, I'm never gonna forget that ever again.
That's one of your favorite parts of this, I guess.
Well, you know, I remarked to myself recently that there was 2 Gatling guns on the horse, but there was also another Gatling gun that Neo was firing at the Matrix spooks. So we had 2 Gatling gun scenes, and we had 2 Keanu Reeves scenes. And I think that last one, though, it's pretty heart-wrenching. That scene is from A Scanner Darkly, a movie by Richard Linklater, and he's a great director. But the movie is about paranoia and about people spying on you in your home. And if you watch that full scene in the movie, he goes into the house and he lays down and he makes a comment about how the scanners are watching and I hope they get it right. And that's sort of the whole theme of this episode. We go back to the very beginning, talking about the Robert Redford Brad Pitt scene, where Robert Redford's saying these rules are protecting you and saving your life, and Brad Pitt saying it's still not right. And I think that is the dilemma that we are in today in the world of surveillance, and the technology is watching us all the time, as John McAfee warned us in that clip that we played by him. And you know, we're not just going to unplug it, because obviously we're on it right now. We're using technology. It's very useful. It's very wonderful. But we can't always rely on the technology, and we need to get back to talking to real people in the real world and having valuable conversations, friendly, rational conversations about what we each believe, and to figure out what's real in the world, and not to be in this kind of mentality that you don't get to have the right to say your piece, because that's your right.
Another point to be made is not only is it watching, as in the movie Scanner Darkly, but now it's censoring. Now it's like, yeah, like you say, so we have a right to speak. We have a right to use these tools here on the internet to have these conversations. And no, we can't build another internet, just like we can't build a bunch of other roads. We have to share them. We have to share that space. And I think where we're headed doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, but we do need to deal with these issues. We need to fight against the censorship, because to figure out what the truth is about any given subject, we can't tolerate censorship in order to get to the truth. So this is why this is such an important issue for the direction of this country, and really for the direction of the entire world. So hopefully we'll be in the future talking more about this issue.
I would like that. And I also want to remind everybody that we've already shot several episodes. Our first episode in 2 parts, we have important interviews with the Socratic assassin, Mr. Jan Helfeld, and the Socratic innovator, Michael Strong. We also did our last episode, for which this is the cover story, with Caleb Taylor, who is a public policy expert here in Virginia, who's out there every day fighting for our liberty. And I just want to thank all of those guests. I'd also like to thank our friends Jim Turbot and Charles Barry Williams for being our panelists on this episode. And of course, we thank our executive producer, Bernard Carmen. We couldn't do without you, buddy.
Well, you too, man. Kevin Rollins.
So Bernard, we started this episode in a dark place. Let's go out with some light.
Kevin, I think that's a great idea, because it dawned on me that it's a lot easier to see where you're going when you're not stumbling in darkness.
Oh, armor for this spark to hold us till the day when fear will lose its grip and heaven has its ways, and heaven has its ways, when all will harmonize, and you know it's in our hearts, the dream will realize. Heaven knows no frontiers, and I've seen